All right, folks, welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Demons. You heard me correctly, City of Demons. And, of course, we have today one of the most amazing ufologists. Literally, if you haven't read his books, I highly recommend you do. As a matter of fact, I'm sure most of you know this, but Preston Dennett was probably one of the biggest reasons that changed my outlook onto knowing how many more incidents there were that were happening with the UFOs all around the world, and especially with crash and retrievals, that I had no freaking idea how many, but he was in 2013 for a time when I started on Revolution Radio. He was my co-host. So, without further ado, Preston Dennett, welcome back, dear friend.
Hey, thanks, Dr. J. Great to be back.
I'm very excited that you have a new book, Schoolyard UFO Incidents, huh?
Yeah, encounters, Schoolyard UFO encounters.
Encounters. Well, I labeled it as incidents. Okay. Either way.
Same thing.
Same thing. Same thing. Now, before we get to how you started investigating these and why you chose to do a book on that, there are several of these famous cases. I mean, as a matter of fact, somebody that I found that was a listener. I always say this all the time. Some of the best stories come from the listeners' encounters. One of them, he is actually, he drew a lot of what the encounters happened to him at school. His name is Adam Ambrose. I don't know if he's listening today or not. But the point being is, you know, I always find more amazing information. Everybody, chances are, if they're here, they've either seen a UFO, maybe had an encounter, maybe even been taken or something like that. But the case that I remember, aside from what Adam's case, the Schoolyard UFO incident, was the Zimbabwe case, Africa. 62 children, apparently?
Right, Rua, Zimbabwe. There was actually 200 children on the playground at the time, but at least 62 saw this object up in the sky, comes in for a landing. There's multiple objects, actually. And there was beings, humanoids, that came out of this craft. Some saw only one, some saw two. There was apparently three, because several of the students did see three beings. Two stayed with the craft initially, and two approached the children.
Ooh.
And yeah, I mean, this is the ultimate case of schoolyard encounters, and very well known.
It's John Mack. Didn't he investigate that?
Yeah, actually, the first investigator was Cynthia Hind,
Okay.
who really is, the Africa ufologist. She's pretty much the leading, or was. She's passed away now. She investigated hundreds of cases in this area. And she was on the scene actually the next day. It's a really amazing case because there are so many of these witnesses who are, by the way, of elementary school age. No adults saw anything with this particular incident. There was one teacher on the playground at the time. By coincidence or not, there was a supervisory meeting. So the 13 teachers that worked there at the aerial school were having a meeting, and were not on the playground. And several of the kids did run up to the one adult on the playground. She was manning the snack stand, so she couldn't really leave it easily. And the kids were screaming, "There's a UFO, there's something." And she's like, "Pull my other leg." She didn't believe him. And they ran to the meeting inside of the school and interrupted the supervisor meeting and said, "Oh my gosh, something's happening." And again, they were not believed.
Do you think part of the reason that why they chose to maybe land in where children are because of the same size as some of these ETs?
I did think about that. I'm not sure if that is the reason, but it is certainly an interesting speculation. We don't know for sure why they're doing this. But I think just based on behavior, what we're seeing is I've got 100 cases, Dr. J.
Wow.
It's not just the Rua, Zimbabwe. I think there's a misconception out there. And half of the cases involve elementary schools. very young children. So yeah, they are attracted to these people who are approximately the same size as them. But I think what we're looking at is they're coming, get them while you're young type of mentality. They're getting to the children before they've got any preconceptions or,
before the fear and things like that just starts happening through society in general. I would think that a 5-year-old coming in contact with an ET might have a lot less fear than, say, a 15-year-old or a 25-year-old.
Exactly, because these children at the time, and this is generally true, don't know what UFOs are, haven't really thought about it, and are basically just, to them it's just another person. Obviously strange looking, and there was some fear involved in this particular incident because it was so dramatic. And that's generally a pattern too. It causes chaos on the playground, particularly afterwards. But yeah, this Rua, Zimbabwe case is astonishing. It took place in the middle of a wave of activity, by the way. That's another pattern that turns up. It's not an isolated incident. There were sightings in that area the day before that, and the day following that. But boy, oh boy, this craft landed literally right next to this school with the expressed intention, I think, of contacting these children.
Did any of the adults see this? Because I've heard there are times when UFOs come to schoolyards, a lot of children see them, yet not a single adult can see them for whatever reason.
In this case, no adults did. And by analyzing the 100+ cases that I've compiled, half at least do involve adults. So yes, that's absolutely something that does happen. Adults see this at least half the time. So it's not just the children.
But they're also not seeing it the other half, which is kind of bizarre if you think about it. I mean, if you got children out for recess, there's going to be a teacher or somebody out there supervising them. It's not like they say, okay, come out of the classroom, come back in an hour. It doesn't really work that way. At least one school administrator, if not more, are going to be out there with the children. So it just blows me away that half the time these craft are coming in, landing, or whatever they're doing nearby with the children, and yet the adults can't even see that happening.
Yeah, it's astonishing. I think it's partly because the ETs are not really interested in contacting the adults in these situations. Another thing is adults tend to be skeptical. There's a number of cases where the kids do their best to get the adults out there, and the adults do not come or won't even look. So there's a skepticism factor that is contributing to that.
Let me ask you about another. What would you say would rank up there near the Zimbabwe? I know there's about 4 or 5 cases that we talked about that are, very memorable, and we'll go through those, and then we'll go into some of the others. But what would you say ranks up there right up with Zimbabwe?
I love the Zimbabwe case because it has all the elements that we see in a schoolyard encounter. There's humanoids, there's communication with the children and the humanoids, there's a landing, there's a large amount of children. But yes, there are a number of very well-known cases. Probably right up there would be the Broadhaven school incident. This is another elementary school in Wales, actually. It's another thing. This thing is worldwide. Most of the cases I've compiled are in the United States because that's where we are.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, Wales, Australia, Africa, Brazil, Mexico, Belgium, France, Spain, England, Canada. I could go on. Indonesia. I mean, it just goes on. So the Broadhaven incident is very similar. It involved about 12 to 15 elementary age school children who saw this UFO. It came in for a landing. Out comes this humanoid, short, large dark eyes, in a uniform.
Typical gray, right? Short, large, dark eyes. That's what sounds like a gray.
Somewhat. It does. In the Rua, Zimbabwe case, some of the children did see what you would describe as a gray. Others described something like, no, it had long black hair. It looked like a hippie.
Huh.
So a number of these do have hair and are not your typical grays. And I don't think the Broadhaven incident involved your typical gray either, though it's hard to say. The students were very young. They still remember it. None of them have retracted their story. To this day, they hold, commemorations and things like this. They went, this thing was there. It came in for a landing right next to the school, not far away. The humanoid did not try to communicate with the children that we know of, though we can't completely rule that out. The children some of them did get very frightened and started crying and ran away. Others were curious and, interested. It didn't last very long before this humanoid went back into this craft, a typical flying saucer type craft, oval or cigar shaped with portholes and a ramp, the whole thing. And they go back running to the teachers who initially don't believe them, but can see that they're very sincere, and finally just separate them and have them draw what they saw. And this is so cool because this happens in a lot of these cases. The teachers finally realize that this is a real incident and separate the children and have them, do a little crayon drawing or pen drawing of what they saw. And the Broadhaven drawings are astonishing. They're like the Rua Zimbabwe drawings, each showing basically exactly what these kids saw. They're very accurate in terms of, the commonalities, or I guess corroborating each other.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this thing came right into the ground. With the Rua Zimbabwe case, it kind of landed in a grove of trees. Same thing happened here.
It landed, you said, in a grove of trees?
Yeah, these craft have a tendency to land next to a school in a grove of trees.
Wow. Okay. I'm just trying to picture that, because I would think, what are they, levitating above the ground, or just really don't care what they're doing to the trees?
Well, they can maneuver, and obstacles, of course, present no, obstacle to a UFO. They can go through the ground if they want. We've seen that in a number of cases, going into water, things like this, through forests. But yeah, it's just a pattern I've noticed where these things kind of slip in there among the trees. Perhaps to keep out of sight from other witnesses. I don't know. I'm only speculating there. But it turns up enough where I'm like, wow, here we go again. And so what I've got is it's over 100 cases, by the way, but at least 100 very solid cases, probably closer to 120. And 30% involve landings or humanoids, which is an astonishing number when you compare that to your typical sighting.
Yes, close encounter of the first kind.
Right, because landings are relatively rare. But when it comes to schools, no, they're not. 30% involve landings or humanoids. Most of the cases occur during the day. That's another important distinction. Most of these cases involve, not one or two witnesses or 10 or 20, but 30, 40, 50, 100, 200, 300, 400 in a handful of cases. Kids are seeing these things. It's just these amazing patterns that keep turning up. Another pattern that really shocked me and was amazing is there's often a governmental response, whether it's a military response or, city officials, police coming in to investigate. This happens fairly regularly.
Or the Men in Black, for instance. I have a question here for you. This is from Soul Brother 19. Was the UFO, I'm putting that in there, picked up on radar, or did any planes flying over see it?
There are some cases where this does happen. We don't know if it's picked up on radar. I have not been able to determine that. But certainly in the Beverly Hills High School case, planes came afterwards. In the Westall, Melbourne, Australia case, there were 4 planes circling around this thing. That's not at all unusual for planes to come zooming in, usually, towards the tail end or after the event.
So now, okay, so in the Wales incident, right? Did you keep in touch with? Did you talk to any of the children to find out if they were taken after that point?
No, I didn't. I was able to trace a few cases, not as much as I would like, and I wasn't able to talk to anyone from the Broadhaven incident. But there are cases, where people do have follow-up visitations. There's one case, I just was able to squeeze it in the book, comes from Leonard Stringfield, very well-known researcher, who investigated this case. He got a call from a teenager who was frantic, said that UFOs were chasing him. And next thing he knows, the father of the teenager calls and says, "My son is missing. I need your help." And so this was a big missing persons case, and they traced it. The student left a note on the kitchen table to his parents saying that he had seen a UFO the day earlier on the way home from school. And he felt like it was going to take him. And he ran away, withdrew $500 from the bank account, and he was gone. So the police were called. It was a missing persons case. Finally, they did find him at the Atlanta airport. This is in Georgia. And what they found out, after interviewing Leonard Stringfield, talked to this kid several times, it was a year earlier, in October 1974, that this kid was on the playground at his high school when a UFO dropped out of the sky, hovered over him. He's the only one that saw it. And it zipped away, and he had the feeling it was watching him or after him. And that evening, he had a visitation by large-eyed humanoids in his bedroom who told him telepathically, "Don't be afraid, but we need to take you away." So,
go figure, of course, right? And maybe it looks like they were scoping out the school. Here is another question for you. This is from UFO Disclosure TV. And by the way, UFO Disclosure TV, thank you so much for your super chat. And Justin T, both of you. You guys rock. Everybody freaking rocks. Always for your support. Okay, let me find the question here, which is to ask you what you know about the Crestview Elementary School UFO sighting.
Yes, one of my favorite cases and one of the most famous cases. There's about 5 famous cases. There's the Rua, Zimbabwe case. There's the Melbourne Westall High School case, the Broadhaven case, the Hillsdale, Michigan case, and the Crestview School. This is in Opelika, Florida. It's an amazing case. It started out, actually occurred over a 2-day period. This is another thing about these schoolyard cases. These are not simple, flyovers where people see a UFO for a couple of seconds. These cases last, several minutes easy, usually considerably longer than that, and sometimes over a period of days, which is what happened here. And it was a Thursday when about 12 students and one teacher, Mr. Apfel, were out on the playground, and one of the students, they were coming in from the lunch recess, points to the sky and says, "What's that?" Points to this saucer, metallic saucer, and the teacher's like, "Gosh, I don't know." He described it as looking like 2 lenses, back to back, and metallic, and silent, and pretty high up there. And it zips away, and they didn't think much of it until the next day, when suddenly people are all out on the playground when these UFOs show up. And not just one, there were several, and one of them came in for a landing right there next to the playground. And at least 200 people saw this thing. It caused absolute, complete chaos.
It's crazy because you have 200 witnesses, right? They may be children. I get that. No problem. At an elementary school, that doesn't mean they're crazy and they're not describing something that they don't know what the hell it is. It really bothers me that skeptics just brush it up. Oh, they're not trained observers. Swamp gas is what they saw. Some bullshit answer like that.
Right.
It really bothers the hell out of me.
Well, I mean, let's face it. You can argue both ways. Children do have a blurred sense of reality and fantasy. They do.
True. But
very
even
imaginative.
When I was a child, though, and what I saw with the first time, I was about 5, there was at least 30 people in my proximity, all adults. They absolutely saw what could be described as the sports model, upside down, inverted, drop down from God knows how high, down to about, 5,000 feet or so, and then just shoot straight up into, till nothing. But if anyone's interested in seeing exactly what I saw, it's actually Jeremy Corbell did an amazing job when he compiled the UFO pictures that he used in the Bob Lazar documentary. The one that looks like the sports model, and it was apparently shot in 2008. And I'm going to ask Jeremy this soon. to find out if it was in the same area, because there is a tendency, because these craft are using gravity, that a lot of times, just like that Turkey incident, and Preston, by the way, I'm not just speaking to you, I'm speaking to the audience now. That Turkey incident where, 3 years in a row, I believe, and Preston, please do correct me if I was wrong, I know for at least 2 years, that the one where you could zoom in and you could see the grays inside that craft. Do you know what I'm talking about? The Sea of Mura. I don't remember the name of the city.
Yeah, sure, I
The
remember.
point is I got the impression that if it happened the same time, it's almost like these, beings decided, let's just skip a year, So that's why I want to know if that 2008 picture, which is actually a video, but it's only a screenshot that Jeremy Corbell shows, it happens to be in the same area, because who's to say that 24 years later they didn't just zoom to see what's in the same spot?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I know that schools are definitely being targeted. So this is definitely something I think that's part of the ET's agenda, is contacting children, just because there's so many darn cases. In the Crestview case, I mean, there was 200 children seeing this thing, and what's really interesting is the military shows up while this incident is still taking place. There's a number of conflicting reports. Some people say, no, the UFOs took off and then the military showed up. But no, there's enough reports in there where the UFOs are still out there, schools shut down, it's evacuated, they send kids home, and the Air Force is going through the schools, freaking the kids out. And as they're walking out, the kids, the UFOs are still out there. So it's a really intense case.
Now we went through, Zimbabwe was in the 90s, right? 94, 92, that era?
94, yeah.
Okay. The Wales was 74?
Correct.
What was the Crestview?
67.
67, okay.
Yeah,
now, what is the next case that really, is one of the bigger ones, like we said, the 4 or 5 big ones?
Well, we've covered the Rua, Zimbabwe, and the Broadhaven, and the Crestview case, but probably, I'm going to say maybe the biggest case of all of these is the Melbourne case, the Westall high school case in Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, no, that's interesting, because now we're talking about high school. We're not talking about 5, 9-year-olds, etc., where their bodies are clean, they're not using drugs, etc., their adrenal glands are clean, they're not using any drugs, which means that if what Dan Burrish said years ago is true, that the way they induce you to control you is by flooding your brain with natural opiates that your brain produces, then high school kids start experimenting with drugs, smoking weed, etc., etc. So I don't know if they're as susceptible as being taken or controlled as, say, someone 10 years to their junior. So this is interesting that you actually came across a massive case at a high school.
Yeah, these target not only mostly elementary schools, but certainly, junior high or primary schools, middle schools, high schools, and colleges, for that matter. One of the most famous cases is a college. But the Westall High School case is right next to the Rua, Zimbabwe case in terms of, how influential it's been and how well-known it is. And it involves at least 200, probably closer to 300 students who saw this thing. It all began when a bunch of people were out on the playground and see this flying saucer. Someone shouted, "It's a flying saucer!" And, Terry Peck, she looks up, and sure enough, it's a round silver disc, she said, low over the school. A bunch of kids went running inside to Mr. Greenwood's class. He's the science teacher. The kid runs in there and says, "There's flying saucers outside." The whole class laughs, and the teacher finally calms them down. It's like 5 minutes to the bells is going to ring. And so they all want to run outside, but he's like, just wait. We'll investigate it. We're a science class. Let's go.
I would have knocked him out, and I would have just went outside, right?
Right. So anyway, they do run outside. By this point, there is complete chaos ensuing. A number of teachers did see this object as well. Mr. Greenwood certainly did, and described it as a silver metallic saucer. And there was more than one, and one of these comes in for a landing in this place they called the Grange, which is a group of pine trees right there behind the school, right over the fence, on the other side of the school grounds fence. And so all these children, 100 of them go running towards the fence, and only the brave ones jump the fence and go towards the Grange, which is, not something you're supposed to do, but something that did happen regularly with students going out there. So they knew the way and ran up to there, and then this thing is on the ground. It's right there on the ground. There's a small group of students. One of the first people to reach it was a girl. She fainted dead away. There was apparently a number of people who did faint. About a group of a dozen children or so, 6 to a dozen, surrounded this thing when it suddenly, it was radiating heat. It lifts up, it's perfectly silent, turns on its side, and takes off. Zoom, being chased by these planes, which had come zooming in at this point.
Now, here's a question that is, you could actually tie into this, what you just mentioned, that the planes. I'm assuming military, right?
No, these were Cessnas. They weren't overtly military, but probably. Mind you, this is 1966.
Yeah. Here's the question for you. So this is again from Sol Brava 19. Besides UFO investigators, did any government officials interview the children?
Oh, yeah. With the Westall High School case, there was a cover-up put into place by the military. The military arrived immediately following the incident. Within 20 minutes, a special assembly was called. The headmaster was either on his own or influenced by the military, released a statement to the students, gathered every student in the school into the auditorium and said, what you saw was nothing. You didn't see anything. Don't talk about it. There's no such thing as flying saucers. And sort of listed a list of debunking excuses. And several of the children were brought in privately and interviewed by government officials, military officials, and told that what they'd seen was not what a UFO or anything, or it was a secret government project, or it was helicopters, or anything else but what they actually saw, a weather balloon. To this day, there are skeptics and debunkers trying to say it was a weather balloon, which is ludicrous. This thing left landing traces, burn marks on the ground. There's no way this was a balloon, and certainly would not have caused the government presence in such large numbers. These were soldiers in camo. The TV station showed up. The police showed up. Children were out on the front being interviewed, and their interviews were cut short, and anyone who got interviewed got detention.
Go figure, really.
Yes.
That's sad. That's really sad.
So children were basically frightened into silence. There were a few articles in the newspapers which appeared, but this case was effectively quashed. It was 1 year later when James McDonald, a very well-known early scientist who was looking into this, he went over there and interviewed Mr. Greenwood and several of the students. They called the local airport, who denied seeing anything or having any knowledge of these 5 airplanes that were circling around the whole time, which is ludicrous because they had to have seen that. So it's an amazing case, and one of several which involve government response.
Now, okay, so what would you say is the next largest case?
Largest is a tricky word, because there was a case in New Zealand, in Maranui, New Zealand, involving 400 students. It's one of the most largely viewed incidents. Mm-hmm. And it all began when they were all out there. And this is the weirdest thing. These things show up at recess. They're timing themselves. I'm convinced at this point. They know when recess is, because all these children are out there, and the teacher is out there on the school playground, watching it. There's 2 people out there and 400 students, 2 adults and 400 students. And suddenly he's like, gosh, why is it so quiet? He looks around, and all the children had stopped playing. Instead, we're staring up at the sky. He turns and looks up where they're looking, and it's this giant black hole in the sky. That was his first impression. And this thing kind of elongates and gets sort of oval shaped. and starts to move, and it gets closer, and he realizes, oh no, this is a disc. This is a metallic disc of some sort. It's very huge. There's an airport a mile away. They denied ever seeing this. This is not in an isolated area. There were houses around. No one saw this, while everyone here on the playground saw it. And 2 adults who did release, extensive statements saying that this was, one student comes running up to the teacher, is that a UFO? And the teacher says, yes, that's what it is. Because they had no explanation for it. And this thing hung there for a good 15 minutes or so, and finally just zipped off. So it's an amazing case that's not well known. Probably the next well-known case would be the Hillsdale, Michigan case in 1966. This, by the way, was 2 weeks before the Westall, Melbourne case. It's the weirdest thing. These schoolyard cases come in waves. There'll be one, and then 2 weeks later, there's another one on the other side of the world. And then 2 weeks after that, another one. And there's just these weird timing factors. A year does not go by without a major schoolyard incident. And the Hillsdale incident took place, like many others, during the middle of a wave of activity. Mm-hmm. And this was at night, and a bunch of girls were in the girls' dorm. This is a college. And suddenly one of the young women screams out, come to the window. There's something out there hovering over the swamps next to the school. And it looked like it was about a half mile, maybe a mile away. And it was just this light, and all these girls come running to the window, and first it's a crowd of 10, and then it's a crowd of 20, and people start running outside. Adults start running outside. Pretty soon, there's 87 students, school officials, looking at this thing, which starts to move around and darting. It comes real close to the dorm at one point, freaking everybody out, circles around an airport beacon, comes in and actually lands about a quarter mile away, at which point a bunch of the boys jumped and took off towards, through the swamp trying to get to it. They weren't able to. It took off again. The police were called, and they're like, yeah, we already see it. One of the police pulled out his gun, and the other guy's like, put that away. It's not going to affect them.
Yeah, seriously, I know, right?
So this was very well viewed, very well authenticated. Immediately prior to it, there had been a major sighting by another witness. This was a huge wave of sightings, and it actually got the attention of Project Blue Book, who came walking in, and J. Allen Hynek was asked to do a press conference. He had only just heard of the case, and it was like 4 days old at this point. He hadn't really done a proper investigation. When he was asked to do a press conference, it was a zoo. Press was like looking for little green men, he said. And he says, it could possibly be swamp gas. And the press seized on that term, even though he didn't really conclude that. He kind of did and kind of didn't.
The thing that really bothers me the most is, after Project Blue Book ended, J. Allen Hynek, this is what most skeptics absolutely don't even touch ever, and it pisses me off more than anything. Okay, yeah, he explained a shitload of cases away from 47 to 69. I get that, no problem. There were still 700 unidentified cases where he could not explain with any means. However, after that, he became one of the biggest advocates ever. And I'm sure you've known this when he discussed why he chose the swamp gas, because he was sort of pressured to find an excuse. He even said that was a bullshit excuse.
Yeah, he was towing the party line at this point. He had been disenchanted for a number of years. There was one case he pointed out, a landing in Nevada, where a very reputable witness, a soldier who had just completed flight school, saw 3 landed UFOs. He described, he got out of his car, walked up to them, and they took off. And Blue Book came to investigate and weren't interested in what he had seen. They wanted to know his mental state and tried to make him look like a fool, and were looking for, basically dirt on him. And that's when he realized, this is not a legitimate investigation at all.
Not to mention the fact that they also didn't give him the best cases. I'm surprised, J. Allen Hynek even got a chance to investigate the Socorro, New Mexico incident. But I do know, and you know this too, he talked about this after. At 69, up until his death, that the best cases he never had a chance to even talk about because they never gave him the cases.
Right. Cases that, quote, affected national security were routed to the Air Technical Intelligence Command and never really hit Blue Book. So Blue Book was kind of a way for the Air Force to, quote, investigate it, but really it was a way to deal with this flood of reports coming from the public, while the real research was going on at very high levels. This subject is a subject that our military has taken very seriously for a very long time, while at the same time enacting a policy of ridicule and debunking to the general public, using our tax dollars, by the way.
Yeah, seriously, right?
So yeah, this is the Hillsdale, Michigan case was sort of a watershed event, certainly for J. Allen Hynek, but also for Schoolyard encounters and UFOs in general. Because what this did was cause a public outcry. There was a lot of tension between the Air Force and the public as a result of this swamp gas explanation, which to this day is famous. You know, the swamp gas explanation is very well known. And here's where it kind of started, the Hillsdale, Michigan case. And we all knew it wasn't swamp gas. Everyone who was there knew it wasn't swamp gas. So it was a ridiculous explanation, and the public wanted answers. At the time, Ford, soon to be President Ford, was, I believe, governor of the state. And he called for an investigation. And this actually did lead to the first congressional investigation on the subject of UFOs. So it was a very important incident. It also, in a way, led to the death of Project Blue Book as well.
Because of him wanting to look into it?
Well, at this point, the Air Force was like out of their minds trying to deal with this UFO subject. And so they hired the University of Colorado to do the Condon Committee, which was headed by Robert Condon, I'm not sure if that's his first name, but Condon and Lowe.
Edward Condon, yeah.
Edward. And so it was a study which was drawn from the cases in Blue Book exclusively. They didn't do their own research at all. And those two guys, who are heading the investigation, were caught. Basically, it was a sham investigation. There was a memo that was leaked which said that they had no intention at all of doing a legitimate investigation, and the trick was going to be to make it look like they were actually investigating when they knew already that UFOs weren't real.
Well, what didn't another thing Edward Condon say was that I already have my conclusion, but we're not supposed to submit it yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Crock of shit.
So, yeah, I mean, this investigation was doomed from the beginning. A bunch of people actually, the whole staff ended up just walking out at some point, and following, the Condon Committee's, quote, negative conclusion on UFOs, which they said it's not real and it doesn't affect national security. And they also put a big long page in there about why this should not be taught in schools, and students should not be allowed to read UFO books and do their papers on UFOs. I don't know why they felt compelled to put that in there, but they did. And this Condon Committee conclusion led to the death of Blue Book. Following, the release of this conclusion, Blue Book ended, and all official government UFO studies from that point on were done. It all went on in secret from that point.
Now, let me ask you, going back to other huge cases, is there another giant case, or did we touch on the 4 or 5 before we start going into the other cases? Because after we get to the biggest cases, the next question I would want to know is what's the most recent case?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this has been occurring. The earliest case I found, actually, I think it was 1860 or 1850.
Jeez.
I have that. It took place over a college in Tennessee, 1853, in Spencer, Tennessee. These lights were dancing over this college for a period of half an hour, pulsating and putting on a display. So that's the kind of behavior we're seeing. These objects, their agenda, judging, solely on their behavior alone, is to be noticed. They're absolutely putting on what amounts to a display, a publicity stunt, announcing their presence. I think that is their main agenda. But yeah, there's a lot of these really amazing cases. One of my favorite occurred on October 22nd, 1954 in Marysville, Ohio, at the Jerome Elementary School. There was about 60 students outside, and due to good behavior, they had been given an extra recess, and this is when it occurred. At like 3:15 p.m., some of the students noticed this weird object hovering over the playground, pretty low there. Your normal UFO sighting is, fairly high, 5,000, 10,000 perhaps. These objects, that would be extremely high for a schoolyard encounter. Generally speaking, they're about 1,000 feet, 500 feet, in some cases 30 feet, or even landing. So they come really low. And so about 60 children were watching this thing for a good 4 or 5 minutes. It was very bright. It had portholes or lights on it. Finally, they're like, we better call the teacher. And they called out the principal, Rodney Warwick. And he runs out into the fire escape. He sees it. It's so bright he had to shield his eyes. He called it the most astonishing thing he's ever seen in his life. And couldn't believe his eyes. Calls for the other teacher right near him. And she comes running out, and right before she runs out, this thing darts away like nobody's business. And at that moment, and this is so interesting, this thing released this weird substance like cotton candy or snowflakes, or looked like snow, and it filled the entire sky. It was extremely beautiful. Everyone was oohing and eyeing as the entire school becomes coated with what we now know is angel hair. It's this wispy white cotton candy type substance. And for the next 45 minutes, it rained down over the school, completely coating the playground, completely coating the school, and about several miles around it, actually.
It's too bad it didn't happen 150 years later, because that would have been tested.
Right. Well, this was 1954. So
well, okay, that was 54. But either way, okay, that's not the 1853 case, but 1954, I don't think they would have tested. They didn't have the equipment to, look at it, even things at a molecular level, or, there was no electron microscope or things like that.
Well, yeah. I mean, actually, it's very interesting you mentioned that, because there was a lot of this stuff, and kids were picking it up and, playing with it. The teacher, the principal, Rodney Warwick, he had a bunch of students bring some to him, as did, the other teacher, Miss Dittmar, and they played with it and they tested it. It looked like asbestos. They noticed if you touched one end, it curled up into a little ball, and as soon as you touched it, it dissolved. But they had enough of it where they could gather bunches of it and roll it up into sort of this gelatinous ball. It turned their hands green, distinctly green, which freaked out Miss Dittmar, and she immediately washed her hands, whereas Rodney Warwick was like, you know what, I'm going to leave it on and see what happens. And his hands got really clammy and cool, which, indicates evaporation, and the green color disappeared. But they did save a substance, and were able to turn it over to the local newspaper, who turned it over to Air Force authorities at Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus. And no response was ever received from the Air Force regarding, what they found. But yeah, there absolutely was substance collected.
Now, okay, so we went through five, right? 5 school cases so far?
We touched on several, yeah.
1853, 1954, 67, 94, 70... I didn't write the 70 part. Okay, now, let's talk about what was the most recent case in your book that you investigated. Because clearly, obviously, because you're here, like you mentioned earlier, you talked about mostly cases that were in the U.S. But say something in Mumbai or, Uganda, anything like that may well not have come to us, and may have stayed locally, I would think may have happened as recently as, I don't know, a few weeks ago, a few years ago, etc. But in the U.S., of the cases you put in this book, what's the most recent?
There are several from this year, actually. They're not
this year, huh? 2019?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm telling you, this is a thing. Not a year goes by where this doesn't happen. I got a case February 8, 2019, in Walkerville, Michigan. A guy was driving by and saw this big light, he said, right above the school in Walkerville. He heard a low hum coming from it. Lights were on it, rotating around, and it flew very quickly away. 1 month later, March 25th, 2019, a mother is driving her child to elementary school in Fayetteville, Georgia, and she drops the kid off, and she gets in her car, and she's driving home, and she looks, and she sees a large V-shaped craft hovering above the school, glowing with yellow light. At this point, she's driving, and the streets are crowded, and she's unable to, pull over. She tried to whip out her cell phone and film this thing, but was not able to do so. And a few months after that, there's another case in Unionvale Middle School in LaGrange, New York. Probably, let me see. Yeah, they occur fairly regularly. The most recent sort of, to me, impressive case was in Indonesia, actually, April 2nd, 2018, where a bunch of children at West Nusa School started screaming hysterically when this glowing circular object drops down from the sky. The teacher was there. She was actually able to get a picture of this thing, which just shows a really bright white light. So it's not really, conclusive. But yeah, a lot of people saw this thing, and she was able to film it on her cell phone. And it had rainbow lights coming off of it. Scared the students pretty badly.
Okay, so that was February 2019. What else from this year?
That's all I could really find from this year. I think sometimes it does take a while to trickle down. I didn't find any really great cases from 2019, but there were a few where people saw these objects hovering over schools.
Jeez, and yet none of our mainstream media covers this. It really bothers me. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
there's
just
one.
saddened, I guess, to say the least. Saddened. Okay, so let's go through some more cases.
Yeah, gosh, there's so many.
I know. That's why I can't wait till I come to your house and pick up one of those new books of yours.
There's one case which, I don't know, for some reason it just really impressed me. This was let me see, I believe it was got this correct, the Roosevelt School. Let me just look this up here. I want to get the details right. Let me see. No, that's not the one I wanted to talk about, though. That is an interesting one. In the Roosevelt Elementary School, this is in Great Falls, Montana, there's this kid. This is on May 1st, 1991. All the kids were out on the playground when a couple of them, not a lot, saw this sort of rainbow glowing object, like a round rainbow, very low in the sky, but it was solid. And the bell rang, indicating, recess is over. And the main witness, he is always first in line. He rushes back to get in school. And as soon as the bell rings, he rushes towards the line. And he's very confused because the line's already formed. And everyone's looking at him like, what's going on? Where'd you come from? There's a weird missing time aspect to it. And because he just kind of popped there. And he looks up and this UFO is gone, and he doesn't think much about it until he starts having this dream the next night. And has this dream where he's inside this craft. There's a bunch of these children from the school there, and they're going through these weird tests by these short beings. He wasn't able to see them. He doesn't know what they looked like, but he called them the controllers or the watchers, and he did not get a warm or friendly feeling from them. But one of the tests was they gave him a box, and he had to figure out how to
open it or what?
How to turn it with your mind. And there was only one.
Telekinesis.
Right, and there's only one correct way of doing it, and you had to kind of play around with it for several times. And the correct answer was, of course, to turn it inside out. And they did another telekinetic type experiment where they threw objects, sort of burning firebrands, at these children who had their arms pinned behind their back. And again, you were supposed to divert it with your mind. So he says it was a pretty, intense experience.
Sounds like literally E.T. school. Literally E.T. school. Them teaching us.
Exactly. Yeah. Here's the case I think that is, gosh, one of my favorite is the Ocean Knoll case.
Ah, I heard that page turn. You have the book in front of you, huh?
I do. This book is driving me nutty.
I
I'm,
am
you
so
know,
jealous. I can't believe I haven't come over your house and picked a copy up yet. I have to. I'll do
well,
it
it's
soon.
brand new.
And you know what? Preston, if you could spare an extra copy, I think it'd be fucking amazing if we give one away to the listeners tonight.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's brand new. It's hot off the press. So I haven't even gotten copies yet, but it is available on Amazon. But this case, I've written a number of books on UFOs, and I'm always very inspired and amazed, and excited about it. But geez, I'm like crying as I'm writing this book because some of these cases, I don't know why, they're just touching me. It's just freaking me out that there's so many of these cases and they're involving such young children. And this is such a great case. May 6th, 1977. Now, this took place in Encinitas, California, to an elementary school called Ocean Knoll. And early in the morning, the children were out on recess. And this is like 8:30. And they see this metallic object floating, glowing lower, lower, lower. It has windows, and looking through the windows, there's a canyon next to the school. It comes to eye level and starts dipping into the canyon, and they can see figures in there. Some of the children said they were kind of lumpy-faced or different. Others said it looked like they were wearing masks, but the point is they weren't human-looking. And these were large windows, large picture windows on a metallic craft. This craft goes down, 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 and apparently lands in this canyon there. And they go back into the school. It's like an hour later. They're back out on the playground. And this thing comes rising up and hovers right in front of the children. Some of the children tried to climb the fence, but they weren't able to. One child did have binoculars and was able to see this thing close up. But a lot of children saw this thing. Teacher saw it as well. And this object, after hovering there, posing for the students, essentially, rises up, circles over the school at about 100 feet high. One of the kids says it looked like two plates stuck together. It had little windows around it. And then it zoomed straight up. And so the father of one of these children, his child comes home and starts describing this thing. And he's amazed. He calls the school, and they're denying it. They don't want to talk about it. He calls the police. The police have no interest. He can't get anyone to get interested in this thing. Turns out that the teachers told the students that they didn't see it and to not talk about it, which really infuriated the father of the child who did see it and who was, when children see these things, it affects them deeply.
I would think so. Absolutely. I mean, hell, if it wasn't for what I saw in '84 and then in 1990, I would not have gone on the path of. You could probably call it an obsession. This is why me and you have bonded so much with your books. And after I read it, and I'm like, Preston, I gotta meet you. Come for dinner. Let's go. And you literally blew my mind with your research. Here, let me ask you a few questions, Preston, because I've got a couple that I've tied up in here first. So let's go in reverse order. UFO Disclosure TV says, Preston, what unexplained encounters his friends, family, and coworkers were having?
Yeah, this is how I got involved in UFO research. Was very skeptical. Did not believe it for a second. Back in 1986, I heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska, and it interested me because this is a commercial airline pilot, Captain Kenju Toroshi. I still remember his name. And they laughed about it on the news. It was very tongue-in-cheek. And found out years later that there was radar evidence, multiple witnesses, a bunch of people on the plane saw it, people on the ground saw it. The FAA had caught it on radar. They later denied it, said, oh, no, it was split images, blah, blah, blah. It's a great case and got me interested. I'm like, wow, I remember my brother had seen a UFO. And so I asked him about it. And he described this incredible encounter where he chased an object down Reseda Boulevard, which is not far.
That's where I know, obviously, yeah.
Right? Right near where I live, actually.
Very near.
Currently. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, it was a metallic dome on top. It was completely silent. At one point, it was maybe a couple hundred feet away, a couple hundred feet up close.
That's very close.
Yeah, it's
In,
darting
in the
around.
scheme of things, when you're talking about things like 20,000, 80,000 feet, a couple hundred feet is damn close.
Yeah, very close. It freaked him out. They took off chasing this thing. With him was his two friends, Phil and Greg. I'm like, well, let me talk to Phil and Greg, which I did. And they described the same thing. And I'm like, gosh, what the heck is going on here? And started asking everyone, in my family, because I found my sister-in-law had a sighting over Van Nuys Air Force Reserve Base. And this ties in beautifully to what we're talking about tonight, Schoolyard UFO encounters, because she proceeds to describe, I saw something else, an entity once. And I'm like, really? And she says, yeah, she attended Stagg Street Elementary School. This is in Van Nuys. She grew up here in the Valley in Southern California, right outside LA, and attended Stagg Street Elementary School in Van Nuys. And lived near that area, went on to middle school and college. She was a college student at the time. And she was driving home and she saw this abandoned shopping cart. She says, I'm going to go get that. She was collecting shopping carts at this time for whatever reason. She was an artist. And she lived near the school, so it was 11 p.m. She grabs her dog, Sarah, and goes walking around the block to pick up the shopping cart, picks it up, and is walking past Stagg Street Elementary School. It's on her right.
I know exactly where this is so crazy. When you're actually talking about places that I know, I'm like literally picturing the exact details.
Yeah, I went there after she told me this, and I took photographs. I'm like... she says, yeah, there's a courtyard right in front of the school. There's, a little plaque that shows the school name and a big old spotlight, a floodlight. And she's standing under the floodlights. This is about, 10 feet from the sidewalk as she's approaching the school from the sidewalk. She sees two children. She thought they were children, except they were bald. And she's like, well, that's weird. And they're so close to each other, and they're standing face to face. That's also weird. And she's getting closer and closer. And she's like, gosh, they almost look like they're kissing, but they're not. And they're bald. Oh my gosh! Her first thought was this,
bald and pale, or just bald?
Bald and pale, very white skin, so white it was clearly, not human. They'd have to be dead. Their skin was chalk white. And at this point, she's walking right up next to them. She's 10 feet away. Her dog is like, just walking along. She's pushing this shopping cart, click, 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 click. And these beings they swivel, is how she described it, like opening a book. They kind of just hovered there and turned and looked at her. They locked gazes. They were not human. They were about 5 feet tall. They had very large oval-shaped heads, chalk white, huge dark eyes, tiny, tiny little nose and mouth, no visible ears, green jumpsuits with a mandarin collar. And she just described this thing very vividly. And she got an instant shock. She says it was very much like being woken up when you're already awake. She was instantly terrified because these were not human beings. And they were very close to her and looking into her eyes. And she quickly looked away.
Oh, I would want to too, because when they're looking into your eyes, I think that's when they're scanning your damn brain.
Yeah, she did not get any messages, which is not unusual. Often people will hear, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you, or something to that effect. She did not hear that, and could still see them. Her dog never reacted, and she kept pushing the shopping cart until she, actually passed the school, ditched the shopping cart, and walked as fast as she could back home, never looking back. Had no missing time that she's aware of. Well, how would you know? Didn't see a UFO, but says, you know what, Preston? That school has sort of an L-shaped building and trees. A UFO could have easily landed there in the playground, and it would have been completely blocked from view. And this is 11 o'clock at night. So my first humanoid case was a schoolyard case.
Jeez. You know what? Is that what I read in UFOs over California? Was that really? I don't want to say her name. I don't ruin it on air. But was it her that saw that being, or I'm thinking of another? It was locally. It was in UFOs over California.
Yeah.
It was in the valley, and it was just what some they thought were children from distance, and they get close and are like, they're not.
Not children. No, it's the closest schoolyard case to me, but there are several in California. There's all across the United States. I mean, this is taking place everywhere. Another great case was an original. It's unpublished. I was at Contact in the Desert recently, and had been doing, researching this for some time. And this lady walks up to me and she says, I had an incident. Can I tell you about it? And I'm like, yeah, sure. She said, it happened on the playground at school. I'm like, really? Go on. And she described this incredible encounter. This is Mentor, Ohio, back in the 60s, in elementary school, Catholic elementary school, I believe. She didn't want to give her name, didn't want to give the name of the school, which I totally respect, but did allow me to use the case. And was out there on the playground, everyone's playing, when suddenly her friends start screaming, look, oh my gosh, look. And all four of them, as far as they know, they're the only ones who saw this thing, sort of silver metallic egg-shaped object, maybe oval-shaped, and comes down lower over the school till it's about 100 feet, and then it's right above the trees, right there next to the school. And they're all screaming and they're freaking out. And she gets a message. It's one of very few cases which do involve direct communication.
Leprosy, straight up.
Right.
Yeah.
And the message was, remember this day. It was very clear. It was telepathic in English. And that's what they said. And this thing goes behind the trees and apparently lands. She can't see it at this point, but it's in the grove of trees again. And she described something else that I've heard a number of times and certainly read, this sort of sense of timelessness, as if time stopped or as if time slowed down. The Rua, Zimbabwe case, some of the witnesses talked about that, as if things were moving in slow motion, or there's a weird sense of timelessness or of confusion about time. And she had that, and she said it was just as if it was me, the UFO, and that was it. The world faded. And she's staring and staring and staring. And the next thing she knows, she sees a silver streak just going straight up. So fast that really, if you were not staring at it, you would have missed it. So fast that, like a tracer is all she saw.
Jeez, wow.
And
That's
gone.
fast. Yeah.
Yeah, and no one talked about it. It was as if it didn't happen. Sometimes that's what happens in these cases. There's a sort of amnesia effect. We can talk more about that. Some really interesting amnesia cases involved with this. But no one talked about it. Often, when there's a schoolyard case, it's the buzz of the school for days or longer. Not in this case.
Now, I still have those two other questions to ask. Friends, don't worry listening. I have not forgotten them. But Third Phase of Moon has joined us. Blake and Brent Cousins, one of the world's largest UFO YouTube channels, and they have a message for you. This is, wanted to give a shout out to Preston on our collaboration with the Alley and Highway TV series.
Right, Alien Highway. Yeah, just finished. That aired recently. And we did a segment on undersea UFO activity. Pretty interesting. Some witnesses got to tell their story. The Tic Tac incident was portrayed.
Hey, man, that's one of the biggest. Commander Fravor.
Right. Gosh, I wish, when you do these TV interviews and they interview for an hour or two and there's really only time for a minute or two for each, interviewee. And it's so unfortunate because I've got so many cases of undersea UFOs going in and out of the water there and really only got to touch the surface. No pun intended. But yeah, very active area. Yeah. Thanks, Blake, and really appreciate that.
Yeah, Blake and Brent. All right. Now, there's actually a third question that came in, but let me get to the other two that were a little bit older, and then I will come back to this third one. So let's go back a little bit. I just want to make sure everyone does have a chance to ask. Okay. We got UFO Disclosure TV's question. Nicholas Cashmore. Why would space people bother with humans?
They're very interested in us. That's a tricky question because we don't know. All we know is, that it is happening. And they do seem to be very obsessed with our planet, certainly with humans, with physically examining us. That's the most common thing that happens. We know they're interested in that. But yeah, they talk to people. They seem to be very interested in relaying messages of certain types, such as warnings of environmental disaster, upcoming hurricanes, nuclear proliferation, overpopulation, pollution, our warlike ways, this type of thing. But also in alternative energy, they're taking people into the engine room and saying, why are you using fossil fuels? We power our ships with magnetics and electromagnetism. And they're also very interested in teaching people about healing and spirituality and channeling and hands-on healing and Reiki and dowsing and psychic reading and out-of-body travel, past lives. This type of thing turns up quite a bit. So yeah, it's kind of a misnomer to say alien versus human, because we don't know who we are.
That's a fact. That's definitely a fact, and there seems to be a lot of evidence. I've even done shows about this, and I really thought long and hard that maybe us humans, Homo sapiens, didn't originate from here. Weren't we maybe possibly brought here? It's a question. No one has a definitive answer, but it's something to explore, by all means.
Yeah, I mean, I am a believer in evolution. We can see that it's demonstrable. I mean, there's no doubt. But as far as, evolution versus creationism, well, I mean, the universe came from somewhere. Evolution does not account for how the universe came into being, really. And if you look at sort of the whole evolutionary timeline, it's a tight squeeze to get humans originating on Earth. And the reason why I'm very much question it is because we have so many accounts of human or humanoid ETs, ones that look just like us, raises very serious questions about human origins and our relationship to ETs, and the fact that greys are interbreeding with us. Yes, perhaps they do have advanced genetic knowledge and how to use it and sort of interbreed species. But from what I'm seeing, I think what the evidence is showing us is that they're probably essentially human, the greys, but have suffered terrible genetic damage, which has caused hair loss and their features to become, malformed.
It's ironic you say that. Have you ever heard of Dan Burrish?
Oh, yeah, sure.
When he worked on J-Rod, what he claims is that gray was in fact a human, an Homo sapien. Some catastrophe happened here on Earth on some timeline. They moved underground. What do you do when you move underground? Well, over time, because of evolution, your eyes will enlarge so you could see in the dark. If you're not moving your muscles so much, if you have technology, doing things for you, you're going to shrink your body. If your intelligence is going to expand, your brain's going to expand, you're going to, grow your cranium. 50,000 years later, well, it's very possible that us humans will look identical to the greys if we were to follow the path that Dan Burrish said.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about it because there are a number of cases that you can march out, which the ETs say flat out, oh yeah, we're time travelers and we're from the future, or one day you will look just like us. And I'm a little worried that we're heading down that path of, apocalyptic type event, which drives
something they always talk about too, right? They always show people that.
This is their number one message. So it's the UFOs are still a mystery. I'm pretty much, it's my assessment we're dealing with biological beings from other planets. I can't get away from that because that's what we are. We're biological beings on a planet. It's a very logical concept.
And by the way, we're on a planet, not a flat planet, but just to make that clear.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a believer in flat Earth.
No. I think I know. Amen. The Earth is not fucking flat, everybody. Please don't tell me it's flat anymore. I'm tired of hearing it. Okay.
I think where that comes from is, the other dimensions and the higher dimensions are Earth-like places, which are essentially not worlds as we think of them, spheres, so to speak. So I don't know, but in any case, I think we are dealing with biological beings from other planets, and it's entirely possible the greys are from our future. There's a lot of time travel cases. It's entirely possible that, our future does involve us transforming into greys.
If we are able to tap into gravity, which apparently they can do, right? Then by default, not only can you traverse very fast, you can create wormholes, Einstein-Rosen bridges, which by default makes you an interdimensional and a time traveler.
Yeah, I mean, we are interdimensional beings. If you really want to get into it, and metaphysics and quantum physics have kind of met together there at the end. And if you get into the whole research of near-death experiences and astral travel, which does have a connection to this subject, there's no doubt there are other dimensions that we do have a soul, a dream body, an astral body, and this is demonstrable. I mean, this has been proven in a laboratory setting, and absolutely, we are interdimensional beings. We haven't mastered it in the way that I think some of these ET races have. They're not only technologically advanced, they're spiritually advanced. This is not to say that all ETs out there are, our space brothers, and we should welcome them with open arms. I don't think UFOs are something to be afraid of. I think for the most part they're benevolent, or maybe not, super friendly, but more like scientists or doctors or tourists or this sort of thing. But it'd be incredibly naive to say that they're all here for our good and there's nothing to worry about. There is evil in the universe.
Oh, of course. There's evil here. We know that. Now, let me get to the farthest back question, which was from Soul Brother 19. Has there ever been any USO schoolyard case? I think that's a little harder to answer, though.
Gosh, no. Not that I could tell. I mean, there was one case where children did see sort of a strange mermaid-like being. I didn't include it in the book. It wasn't quite, had the features that I'm looking for a schoolyard encounter. But it was near a school. So no, that hasn't happened as far as I know of. But I have to tell you, looking into this, some of these cases have only a few witnesses who have come forward. And I am guessing that of the 100 cases I've collected, there's probably 10 times that number, at least, and that most of these cases have been effectively covered up or not talked about or even put into sort of an amnesia state where the people don't remember. I mean, there's one case involving 50 students and numerous teachers, and only 2 witnesses remember it. And they confronted all the other students who were there, and the students were like, nope, don't remember it. It's a great case. They all thought it was the Cessna or the small plane coming low over the playground, except it wasn't. It stops. It's got no noise. It has no wings, no tail. It's a silver craft, and it starts releasing all these smaller little discs, 100 of them, which are whirring all over the place and covering the playground and going across the street. And everyone's screaming, and one of the witnesses runs under the craft, and the teachers are at the door trying to get the kids back in. And the entire case was forgotten for a couple of years until one of the witnesses says, hey, you guys, do you remember that incident? And everyone looks at him like he's totally nuts until one of the other guys like, yeah, I do remember that. He remembers it slightly differently. But yeah, apparently a lot of these cases could be shrouded in amnesia completely. There was another case in France. A lady was at a boarding school, and this craft comes right over the school, and everyone's screaming. This is right outside the little cafeteria area there. A lot of people saw this, and immediately following the sighting, no one talked about it. Everyone completely forgot until about 5 or 10 years later, when suddenly, she's married, and her husband asks her, have you ever seen a UFO? And she's like, oh my gosh, yeah.
It triggered the memory. Yeah.
Weird, huh?
It's not too weird because that happens a lot. I've noticed a lot. People will have their, suppressed for whatever reason, trauma, fear, etc. It'll be suppressed by their conscious into their subconscious, and yet decades later, just a tiny bit will come out based on something someone said or something else they saw.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, before we go on, let me ask you this question. This is from John Tudor, also known as JC of Deprogram Radio, live in London, UK. I think London. JC can tell me. Why do experiencers disagree about grays? And he goes on to say they are drones, robots slash the guys.
Right. I think there's a number of reasons because grays are individuals. Some people are contacted by grays who are teachers. Some are contacted by grays who are doctors. Some are contacted by grays who are security officers. To a certain extent, I'm speculating here, but the point is we're dealing with different individuals with different agendas. The grays are not all necessarily, a united front in what they're doing. We don't know what kind of society they have. We do know that there are different types of grays, and it's probably a mistake to say, the 3-foot grays, which are very emotionless and have been described as robotic, even. I think it would be a mistake to lump them in with the 5-foot kind of willowy grays, or 6-foot even, which can be very emotional and have a much different sort of bedside manner than some of these other grays. There's a lot of different types of grays.
Yeah, and I've heard obviously the glorified robots, right? Then they're like those are the 3-4 foot tall. Then there's like the 4 or 5 feet tall biological ones, and there's like the 6-7 feet tall ones. And that's just 3 that I know of, let alone what's out there.
Yeah, and the hybrids too. I mean, there are people who are contacted by hybrids who are essentially, half human, and very friendly, very emotional, very loving. So you get all types. I think what we're dealing with is basically entities, and so you have to sort of judge them the same way you would judge humans. Their behavior, and I've said this a number of times, falls under the same umbrella as human behavior. What they're doing is what we would do, is what we are doing.
That's true. That's very true. And as a matter of fact, what our ancestors did, they're doing what we did. I'm talking about primates. Primates right now in the last 4,300 years have entered the Stone Age. They are using rocks as tools. They're spearfishing. There's so much, and I didn't even know it went back to 4,300 years. I thought it was more of a recent thing, but apparently so.
Yeah, there's so many mysteries with our planet. The fact that we don't know where we came from is a problem. I took an enormous number of anthropology courses in college. I was very interested in it. And even as I'm, taking these classes, they're pushing back the date of modern humans from 30,000, 20 to 30,000 to 40,000. I'm guessing modern humans go considerably far back, further back than that. When you look at, the Atlantis stories or the stories of ancient civilizations. And like Michael Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology, is a must-read if you're interested in ancient civilizations. There's no doubt. The Vimyanas of ancient India show that we had technology to fly around in the far past.
And even they mention in the Bhagavad Gita that what they describe definitely what could be a modern-day nuclear explosion.
Exactly. So there were modern civilizations within our history, which apparently did have open official contact. If you believe the ancient writings and ETs mating with humans or gods mating with humans. So this looks like an open official contact, and we ended up worshiping them. And it turned out to be a huge problem, which has been one of the reasons why we have been essentially quarantined.
So that's why people call it the prison planet, right?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, because if the UFO phenomena is real, and we know it is, they are out there in massive numbers. We have 5, 6, 7 billion people on our planet. I'm guessing the Greys are numerous as well. The Pleiadians, the praying mantis,
reptilians, right?
Right, are very numerous. And if you see how wide and large our universe is, well, for goodness sakes, there's a lot of beings out there, and we're not seeing them in an open official capacity. Why? Why aren't ETs integrating in the human population in an open official way?
Here, I know that's the question I commonly ask, and I hope changes. literally within our lifetime. I mean, we're having enough things happen. Our material science is getting to the point where I think at some point when we finally are able to do what they do, essentially by breaking what are known laws of physics and generate gravity, then it really won't be such a thing when they start coming here and we meet them and we realize, oh, well, they look like monsters or weird or ugly, things like that. I don't think it really will matter at that point if their technology is the same as ours.
Yeah, I've heard that there's a policy of non-interference, a la Star Trek, which is interesting because there's a number of things that Star Trek was accurate on in terms of like the healing technology and their camcorder devices and transporters and so on, faster than light travel. Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, he had some insights there for sure. So I do find it interesting, yeah.
Now, we still got more questions for you, Preston. Okay, this one is from Common Sense to Me. What does the guest think about Robert Bingham, and has he himself ever tried to call a craft in? By the way, Robert Bingham is the guy who I took you to when you brought your sister-in-law in 2012.
Yeah, I'm a little on the fence with that particular incident that we went down there, whether they were balloons or not.
Yeah, thank you. I've actually come to the conclusion that they are now.
Because I'd never, whether or not it was UFO, I have to say it's a balloon from an investigative standpoint because it behaved like balloons. So I'm not a huge believer, but here's the thing. It could have been UFOs, and yes, you can call UFOs down, and yes, I've done it, certainly. I initially began doing it, well, it's all very coincidental. I wrote an article called Calling All UFOs for UFO Universe, because I'd interviewed this guy who worked for NBC as a special effects guy, and he had set up a peacock's tail at the La Brea Tar Pits here in Santa Monica, at the George Page Museum. Out there on the lawn, he was doing a publicity stunt for NBC and set up this giant peacock's tail with pitchel lights, really large colored lights that you can control in a computerized pattern. And no sooner did he turn this thing on, Arnie Weiler is his name, working with this other guy named Rick Liebert. They turn this thing on, and these UFOs come swooping down as if to investigate. Now, mind you, this thing looked like a glowing disc, or at least a half disc. And that was sort of like what Arnie thought. He's like, it must have mimicked a UFO. And he turns to Rick. He's like, look at that. Look at those UFOs. And Rick's like, oh, yeah, this happens. This happens when I do this. So this is Rick Liebert's job. He's the guy who was setting it up. And I'm like, so I had interviewed Arnie. I'm like, I got to get Rick's number. And I talked to Rick Liebert, and he described another incident which in San Diego where he called down a UFO using lasers. And so I'm like, this is a thing. And I looked it up, and yeah, there was a number of cases. And I wrote an article for it. And this is kind of what kicked Stephen Greer into high gear to form CSETI. He told me later. He's like, yeah, I saw that article. I'm like, oh. He ended up, quoting it in his book on how to make contact. And lights is definitely one of the methods you can use. And he came over here to LA and held a little conference and to form a charter group for CSETI. And I was a member of that group. And darn, on the first night we went out there, 30, 40 of us. It was a bitter cold night, very windy. And late at night here on the Santa Susana Pass. And no sooner had we, gotten out of our cars and climbed down into the woods there a little bit, to the hills.
They were there.
And boom, this object, some guy shouts out, look up. And I looked up, and it was way up there. We're talking, 20,000 feet, 40,000, jet high, very high up. It was a blob of light. And I'm like, well, that's not a satellite. I mean, this is the size of a half moon. This was big. And it was moving. So I'm like, wow. Because I knew instantly when I saw it that this was nothing conventional. I've taken all kinds of astronomy classes. I've been an investigator for many years at that point. And yeah, we had sightings regularly after that.
Now, before I get, and UFO Disclosure TV, I'm so sorry, I'm still waiting on your question. I promise you I will ask it. It's the next question that I will ask. But before I get to that question, Preston, this is what I want to to ask you is if you could explain to the audience. I believe it was one of your books that I read, where in the 80s, possibly, NBC was having some sort of party or premiere, whatever, in the city, and they had their peacock lights out, right? Didn't
Yeah,
a craft come in, and that's where the idea came from? That's where the idea came to what your Greer uses as far as imitating lights like they do.
yep, that was one of them, which I just described at the George Page Museum. Sort of a publicity stunt, and it worked. It called down a UFO, and the other one was in San
Yeah,
Diego.
didn't it come in all down and really slow to look at, and then just got the hell out of
Yeah,
Dodge once it realized it was terrestrial, right?
right. Two of them, by the way, two UFOs came, which is exactly what happened in the other San Diego case, which was on top of the tallest building in San Diego at the time, and they had used a 23-watt green argon laser, which was playing in the beat to Pink Floyd and various rock music.
Nice.
And this V-shaped craft comes low over the building, 20, 50 feet up.
Jeez.
So yeah, you can call these things down. It's now they've termed that a close encounter of the fifth kind. But
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
It's a human-initiated encounter.
Yes, and that would have never been on the table had it not been for you and Greer. Literally, you were there at the beginning of Dr. Greer. And I want everybody to know that because, I know you don't travel with him, you haven't been in his latest movies, but you and him go back decades.
Oh yeah, I've met him several times, and I'm really excited to be, a small part of his research, and I think he's doing some excellent work. I don't agree with everything he says, but that's natural, I think. But yeah, I'm really have known him for quite some time.
Now, I'm sorry to wait for this question, but here it comes. If this is from UFO Disclosure TV, which says, I'm going to read it word for word to you. Can you please ask Preston if he is still an investigator for MUFON? If so, are there any new cases they are working on? Good question, by the way. I'd like to know that.
Well, I'm still a member of MUFON. I do have my investigators thing.
So you're not just a member. You are an investigator.
Yeah, but I don't work actively with MUFON. Currently, I'm more independent. I did for years and referred them many cases. I'm still a supporter of MUFON.
Was there a symposium this past weekend, or is it this coming weekend, by the way? Are you speaking at it?
No, I spoke at one, I think it was 2 years ago. And I speak pretty regularly at the local MUFONs here and various other MUFONs, and they call me for the main event every now and then. I just did a lecture on the undersea UFO activity, which you can see, by the way, on UFO Disclosure TV. It's got like 118,000 hits. It's my biggest hits in terms of the videos I put together. But
speaking of that, you are the world-renowned expert on USOs, specifically for the Pacific Ocean.
Well, Carl Feint, I believe he just passed away, was really the expert. He's been searching
now
the water.
it's you, because you're always in the documentaries and you're on UFO Disclosure TVs. So there you go.
But yeah, I do support MUFON. I think like a lot of citizen UFO organizations, they have their challenges. This is a very tough subject to push forward through an active government cover-up. And there are, I have no doubt, infiltrations from the secret, quote, secret government within all UFO organizations. I think UFO researchers are being closely monitored, and that's not pure speculation. There's been some evidence to support that, certainly. And if you look at all the citizen UFO groups, starting back with APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, well, they caught the CIA spying on them more than once. And NICAP and QFOs and MUFON all have government people within them, no doubt. There's another early one, I believe it was NICAP, which actually fell apart because of this sort of internal squabbling.
The only one that I know left is Peter Davenport. I had him on not too long ago, and he even is gets upset because 95% of the calls he gets are prank calls. Yeah,
this is due to our own government and the way they're treating this subject. And I'm not having it. I'm done with it. They have bungled this very badly. They should have never backtracked on Roswell. It would have been a very different world. We all know UFOs are real. The evidence is out there in the public arena. Most people believe in this subject. Our government is going to lose the faith of the people if they don't start coming clean at a much quicker pace.
This is why I currently argue, and have said, I made a video about this weeks ago, that to me, and I was unfortunately sick, I believe in the hospital even when that's happened, but when the DOD videos came out in my head, and whoever was near me, I said, you know what? Contact's been happening for thousands of years. I said, this is disclosure right here.
Yeah, we've had some movement. I'm so excited. Just recently, pilots, have been pushing back because they're seeing this stuff regularly. Our military confronts this on the front line regularly. And at very low levels, you try and push these sightings up the ladder, you can't do it because there's a skeptical roadblock. At very high levels, this subject is taken seriously. At mid levels, it's not. It's debunked. It's ridiculed. And there's skeptics, genuine people who have
you're right.
Don't believe it.
Remember, I am friends with was it Robert Schaefer, right? He's a huge skeptic on all the major shows, and I do bring him on for debate, right?
He's a debunker.
He is a debunker, and I'm bringing Michael Shermer on soon. If you handed these guys, or if they saw a craft come in and aliens come out, they're going to say it's our technology, and these are, genetically modified humans, or that underwent surgery or something like that. That's going to happen. There's some people that nothing will ever convince them, even if they saw it for themselves. And at the same time, there's those that even if it convinces them, they're just towing the damn line because they're getting paid for it.
James Oberg, Phil Klatt, Donald Menzel, Leonard Stringfield, pretty much.
Donald Menzel, CIA, right?
Yeah, he's used our tax dollars, your money, to make UFO believers, I hate that word, look like fools. Because, this isn't like a belief. It's not a cult. This is happening. And for scientists to say, oh, no, this is not real, when they know full well it is, it's disingenuous.
Well, you said you hate that word, right? UFO believer. And I absolutely agree with you. Truthfully, a lot of times I have to label things UFO because that's what people look for. But I wish I said this on air yesterday when I had Georgios Tsoukalos, but specifically the creator of Ancient Aliens, Kevin Burns. I said to him after, I said, I think part of your success is because you didn't use the word UFO, you used the word ancient astronaut theory. And that right there, it for some reason just clicks in their head. This is why the government started using UAP. This is why they no longer use UAP, because Hillary Clinton gave that away, and they use AAV, aerospace, or advanced aerospace vehicle, I believe is the current term.
Yeah, just call it what it is. Alien craft.
Alien craft. There you go. Non-terrestrial craft and beings.
Because when someone says UFO, that's what they mean. They mean alien craft. That's what a UFO is.
Well, in
terms of definition.
I don't think it serves so much as what you as unidentified. Like I'm looking at a balloon, but I can't tell if it's a balloon versus, say, a helicopter or some crap like that. You're right. I don't think it's come to people that are just unidentified. Which 95% of what things people see in the air is unidentified. However, the term UFO, like you just said, has come to be for the last, since how long after 47 was it flying saucer until it became UFO?
Pretty soon. The flying saucer persisted throughout the 1950s. But after that, it started to be termed UFO.
So 50 plus years, right? 50 plus years.
Oh, yeah.
And absolutely, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, 25 years ago, 35 years ago. You mentioned UFO to me. I knew we're going to talk about aliens.
Yeah, it's not a great term, but, we're struggling to come up with terms to define this phenomena. And we call these beings, entities, creatures. Is creature really the right term to use for a humanoid? I like the term humanoid. I like Nordics. I hate that term as well because, honestly, Nordics aren't always blonde, white.
It's true.
I've got cases where they're Mesoamerican looking. Or one guy says, I interviewed him, he says, the being I saw was probably Middle Eastern looking, he said. Very dark skin, dark eyes.
I've actually heard that, but more times than not, it's, blue eyes, blonde hair. But I've absolutely heard, I've never heard African looking, but I've absolutely heard Middle Eastern, dark skinned and dark hair and etc.
Oh yeah, African, Asian, you get all of it, actually. If you really look into it and you start cataloging the so-called human-looking or Nordic cases, it covers the entire spectrum of the human race. Asian eyes, are very commonly described among ETs. Eyes come to a point.
I'm sure you remember this case, Preston, Japan, and 1800s, maybe 1850s, and they thought it was like a ship that came onto the ocean, but it was this weird-looking Asian woman. Remember that? The UFO case from, I don't want to say ancient Japan, but...
Yeah, I know what I believe I know what you're talking.
There's
don't know
drawings of it, and she's
yeah.
wearing like a bluish dress, and she looks like an Asian woman. But the point is, it's like she's standing next to what could be looked at as a flying saucer.
Yeah, and there's a huge variety of beings. I mean, like, here's one of the cases, a Schoolyard case, involving beings and a number of children. This one is not published. I interviewed the lady myself. This occurred in March of 1966, which is basically the same month as the Hillsdale case and a few, right before the Westall case. It's a heavy-duty year, 1966, for Schoolyard cases, for sure. And this took place at Point Elementary School in St. Louis, Missouri, where this lady, Melody, she and the other kids decided to play tag. Normally they'd be playing Foursquare or something, but just a group of them decided they were going to play tag today, just out of the blue, and ran out onto the football field there. And she looks down and she sees these little footprints. She's like, hey guys, look at this. And there's these tiny little bipedal footprints.
When you say tiny, are you talking like 3 foot, or are you talking like, what the Greer's little alien, like 7-inch or 11-inch, whatever?
Yeah, tiny little footprints, like a child.
Okay.
But they were bare feet, but they weren't normal. The heel was all strangely rounded. The toes were all pointy. It looked really strange. And they're trying to, they're elementary age kids. They're 10, 11 years old. And they know enough to see that this is not, bird tracks or raccoon tracks or anything like this. This is a relatively rural area. There's a farm behind the school, fields, groves of trees, little hills. And suddenly, they're looking at these footprints, trying to figure it out, and none of them can. And they see these flashing white lights in the trees right beyond the school. And they're thinking, oh, an ice cream truck, because that's their mindset. And they had ice cream trucks going through there fairly regularly. And they're like, but there's no way that could be an ice cream truck down there. There's no road. And so they all decide they're going to go run and look. And they hop the school, they go beyond the school boundary. There's 6 of them, three boys, 3 girls, and approach these lights. And they get through the trees and they see this is not an ice cream truck. This is a landed flying saucer. It's not super big. It's like a little car maybe, 20 feet across. Has bright white lights on it, no colored lights. It's metallic. And it's sitting on the ground. And as soon as they see this thing, they see a being. It's about 3 feet tall. They couldn't tell if it had a uniform on or not, but it was very dark, or very sort of gray-black, and looked very muscular. It reminded Melody kind of a humanoid gorilla. Was kind of her first impression, except it was upright and standing and looking at them, looked directly at them. It had huge, dark eyes, bald head, and was very close to them, and never took its eyes off of them as it walked back slowly towards its craft. And it came up to a cow. There was 4 cows on this farm, and it walked right up to another cow, touched it, and that cow fell over, apparently dead or unconscious.
I was going to ask, unconscious, because did they take it or did they leave it there and it was dead?
Well, she's watching this happen, right? And she's like, oh my God. And suddenly, from behind them is a very angry Mrs. Ollendorf, the teacher, and upset and freaking out. She's in a complete panic and screams at the top of her lungs, "Get back now!" and pulls these children away because she sees it too. She can see the craft. She can apparently see this being. She refused to discuss it, even one word about it, and pulled the kids and pulled everyone off the playground. No one else in the playground saw the being. But at this point, as she's pulling them into the school, they do see the lights because of, she's screaming and drawing attention to it. Pulls everyone into the classroom and she starts pulling down the shades, which cover the windows completely. These are old-fashioned shades, which, you pull down and they completely cover the window. Well, the kids weren't having it. There's 40 kids in this class and they're hiding for the windows, and they crowd the windows and they're looking at the shades at this thing. And the teacher's freaking out. She calls the other teachers. She calls the principals. Everyone gets pulled into the cafeteria, or the gymnasium rather, and they get the school buses and they send the kids home early. And one of the kids screams, he's like, "There it goes!" And he watches it take off through the window.
From the bus or the
gymnasium. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a great case, and I'm still trying to track down some of these witnesses, but did talk to her. And another humanoid case, I'm telling you, there are a lot of these humanoid cases. It's really amazing.
Well, let me hear another, crazy, bizarre one that you've researched for this book.
Oh, gosh. There are so many. Here's another one occurred at Peebles Elementary School, and this involves just a couple of witnesses. Two young schoolgirls who decided, who were on the playground when the janitor starts waving at them and calls them into the school there, into the janitor's room. And inside this room is a craft. It's very small, very light, apparently can move it. And this is what the janitor apparently did. And this girl, the witness, I call her Emily.
Well, you said the janitor moved it. What did he think it was?
See, we don't know. We know the janitor's name is Mr. Swan, and Emily walks into the janitor's room, and there's this craft. And Mr. Swan said he had moved it there, that it was broken. Or he didn't say that, but this was what the impression she got. And she looks over at her friend. Her friend instantly loses consciousness. At the same time, a gray steps out from behind the craft and starts speaking with her, and she's sort of got this impression of how this craft works, which again has something to do with electromagnetism, apparently. And she's got some amnesia involved with this because she doesn't quite remember how it all ended, but she describes this typical gray, and it comes to her and it gives her a message. It says, "We are here to remind you who you are." She doesn't understand what that message meant. 40 years later, she still doesn't understand. But this is something she remembers vividly. She told her mother, who was very concerned that it might be some sort of molestation incident, which it wasn't. This was a very bizarre encounter with gray aliens in the school. It's just a crazy, weird case.
Now, what about another case? You remember not too long ago, I think this was from your book, not from here. You discussed this woman jogging with her dog, I believe, early in the morning, possibly Chicago, and she saw like a 15-foot tall praying mantis, right?
Yeah, that case has not been published yet.
Okay.
I'm working on that, but yeah, that took place in O'Fallon, Illinois.
Now, are there so it's not Chicago, but Illinois, so close enough, right? At least it wasn't. Right. I didn't say New York. Point is, but thank you for clearing that up. Point is I wanted to ask you with regards to this new book, has any school case involved those giant praying mantises, or even any praying mantises for that matter?
No. They by and large involve small humanoids. For whatever reason, that's mostly what we do see, by the way. in terms of if you were to statistically analyze humanoid reports. Most of them are short, large-eyed, bald-headed humanoids of various descriptions. Often gray, but not always. So you get kind of a catch-all category that's very hard to categorize.
Well, yeah, because I would think that includes a bunch of different species.
I mean, there was one. This was in let's see, where did that take place? This was in Spain in 1969. The students saw a luminous disc descending toward the school grounds, and sometime later, they were in their classroom when this is how they described it, a gigantic being with green clothes and a huge face peered into the window, and the window itself was more than 6 feet off the ground. So this was either floating or was a very, very tall being. But the next morning they went out there, because this was at night, and discovered several enormous footprints on the ground. So yeah, there are cases of very tall beings. I don't have any involving the praying mantis, but some green-skinned beings, some very unusual beings. There's all different types of cases. I mean, there's like this is really interesting, the Malaysia cases. There was a rash of cases in Malaysia where these objects were landing at schools, and these were little miniature UFOs, and out would come these, inches-high beings, a foot tall. And the students were freaking out, and they rushed towards this little tiny craft. There was like 6 beings. One of them whips out a little gun type, a blaster, and shoots one of the kids and knocks him out. So there was another case where a kid was missing, and they found him in the brush, and he described the same thing. There's a bunch of these, not just one or two. There's a whole rash of these cases with multiple witnesses involving these tiny saucers with tiny beings. And some adults did see them as well.
Now, what's the smallest saucer? I'm trying to picture this, and can you maybe does it look like the sports model, or anything I could reference? I'm just trying to picture. I mean, it's clearly it's a saucer. You didn't say cube or triangle, so.
Yeah, that's a little problematic to get some of the details in these foreign cases because we're limited to some reports which are fairly sparse on detail. Some of the other more well-known cases or local cases are easier to investigate. But a case which took place in Malaysia in 1970, I don't know what the craft looked like other than it was described as a spaceship.
And a small spaceship, geez.
Yeah.
Well, that proves they're obviously clearly different sizes, from 15 foot tall to, maybe a couple feet tall or even inches at that matter? Maybe under a foot tall even, if you consider that what Dr. Greer used for the movie Sirius. Remember that? What'd you think of that being?
Yeah, the Atacama humanoid?
Yes.
I'm on the fence about it because
the point is I whether
I
that's
don't know about
true or not, right? I would think if our universe is teeming, or multiverse should I say, is teeming with life, then who's to say that we haven't been visited by something as tiny as freaking that?
Yeah, I mean, for that matter, look at the range of heights we have here on our planet, from the Watusi to the Pygmies, which is a range, you could fit a full-size human being between the Watusi and the Pygmies. And if you look back into human history, particularly the occulted and, controversial human history, there are accounts of giants on our planet.
Well, as you mentioned with Michael Cremo, that's a fact. As a matter, he is not a fact, but the point is through Michael Cremo, he's shown a lot of great evidence. And one of my favorite cases is not just the 5 million year old, 10-foot tall, skeletal remains they found here in California, but was this Catalina newspaper. And you might know about this, Preston. They removed the damn picture. They removed the damn article. So he shows you what the real article is, and then you see it removed with that from that article with the rest of the newspaper in the museum at Catalina.
Yeah, and this is, if you look through the old newspaper accounts, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of accounts of giants on Earth all across the United States, all across the world. I think there's little doubt, if you look at this from an objective standpoint, that there is something going on here in terms of giants on our, in human history.
Now, there's another question for you here. Let me get back to it. Let's see here if I can pull back. I waited on it because we were still talking about these school cases, which to me are, we are obviously we're going to do another show about this once I get my hands on the book, because everybody, I truly hope you do get a chance to read Preston's books if you haven't already. Out of all the books I get a chance to read, and from all the publishers and authors that I've been, being sent from years, and the ones that I go out and get and have gotten since I was a kid, essentially, Preston's have been the ones that have always been top priority to me. They're the ones that changed me, for crying out loud, and he's very thorough, and I think they're just some of the greatest cases that you put together. That you find, Preston. It's truly amazing that this shit is happening right under our nose, yet not many people are paying attention and doing the actual research like you are.
Yeah, I love doing the field work. I love doing the armchair research as well, finding historical accounts. It's cool, but you really, I think, if you're going to do UFO research, you owe it to your audience and the people out there to do both, and to really dive in deep. And what I've done here with these Schoolyard encounters, man, oh man, there are 100 of them all across the world. There was a case in Sri Lanka, a really interesting landing case, which is one of the later cases involving landings or humanoids. This was 1998. So they're much more rare than your low-level sightings. But that involved school Adikiram Primary School in Sri Lanka, where all the kids were there before the teachers, because some of the students would, unlock the classrooms and get everything set up, and everyone was arriving there early, when this UFO comes and lands right next to the building, right on the playground. Now, that's unusual. Often it'll be like next to the playground or right on the school boundary. But
right where the kids would be playing or are playing.
Right, and this thing lands right directly on the school playground. At least 3 or 4 kids saw it. It left huge imprints. And what's really interesting is the teacher's like, oh my gosh. And they're like, well, we've been saying this thing has been flying over the school for, weeks. They actually had a nickname for it. They called it Coca, which means stork, because they didn't know what it was, but it kept flying over. But this was the first time it actually landed right there on the school. And literally for, 1, 2, 3 seconds, it came down, touched, and took off. Why? Why would it do that? It's the strangest behavior.
Unless it was in a time dilation, unless we perceived it as 2 seconds and the damn thing was there for hours.
I'm not going to rule it out.
Right? There's just so much crazy shit that's true with this. That's what really gets to me. And believe me, just like you do, I have healthy skepticism. If someone just starts talking, I obviously try to compare it with other cases and things like that. I want to make sure I'm trying to get to the truth. And the point is I've found there to be, just like you've throughout your books, there's so many amazing yet bizarre cases, and yet they're in a strange way, even though they're all different, they're all interlinked at the same time. There's a common theme to them, whether taking us, whether it be, showing us technology, whether it be using their technology to fooling us, whether using them for the telepathy and telekinesis to shut our brains off, whatever it be.
Oh yeah, all kinds of commonalities. That's certainly what I found with the Schoolyard encounters was a very definite pattern. Is where these objects come very low over the school. Here's a great case. This was investigated by Ray Fowler, and it occurred at the Beverly High School. And it began when Claire Modugno, who lived next to the school, looked out her bedroom. This was, at night, and sees this, what she thought was a car, but it wasn't a car. It was floating down the street. It was a football shape, and there were no windows on it. It was just this metallic saucer at about 5 feet up, driving down the street. Crazy. She runs downstairs screaming to her family, there's a UFO. They don't believe her. She's frantic. She's inconsolable. So finally her mother and 2 friends go outside to look for it, and they can see, they walk down the street towards Beverly High School, where this object was going. And they get to the field there, and they see 3 objects hovering over Beverly High School, and one's right low directly over the school. Inside the school, there's a huge basketball game going on. None of them ever saw what took place. For the next 20 minutes or so, these objects darted around. One of the 3 ladies lifts her hand up to wave at the closest UFO. It drops down out of the sky right over their heads. 2 of the ladies turn to run, and one of the ladies, she's too, freaked out. She stays there, and the 2 ladies turn around, and they see their friend, and she's now screaming. Her hands are over her head because the UFO is 10 feet over her head.
That's fucking close. 10 feet? Are you kidding me? What was the size of the craft?
It was huge. It was the size of a very large, like a truck.
Jeez.
Like a very small.
I would be scared shitless at that point. I would really think that damn thing is trying to crash into me or whatever. Who knows what the hell it's doing? If it's hovering 10 feet, near you.
10 feet. Initially it's 20 and came down to 10. That's very low. In fact, one of the women privately confided to Ray Fowler that she urinated herself from fear. Oh. And by the way, Blue Book investigated this case, said it was Venus. I'm like, makes me want to swear.
Go ahead. I swear. We do
because
whatever the hell we want.
Because these women were frightened. One of them said she wasn't frightened at all, but I think she was. But it came down to within 10 feet, and to have the gall to call it Venus is
bullshit.
It's reprehensible. And
pisses you off, rightfully so.
Yeah, because they called the police. The police came up and they're like, "All right, where's the plane?" And they're like, "Pointed, it's right there, 30 feet above the school." See? And the police were both visibly shaken. They jumped out of their cruiser. They looked at it, and both of them gave written statements to Raymond Fowler. And after a few more moments, this thing darts up. Planes come and basically chase it away. And here's where it's really interesting. This object goes away from Beverly High School and instantly goes to Gordon College, about 3 miles away, and hovers over it and scares the daylights out of another group of students. I'm telling you, they're targeting schools directly. What is going?
Well, it makes sense because they want kids. Like as I mentioned earlier, for the reason that they're not polluted like an adult would be. Even caffeine, right? Even if you smoke cigarettes, like I'm a chain smoker, you know that. Even if you drink, if you just do those things too, you drink your coffee every morning and you smoke cigarettes, that alone is enough to alter your brain where you can come out of the trance that they put you in, which is why it's a favorite thing that they pick children, according to Dan Burrish.
All right. Well, I think what we're looking at is that they've got an agenda of, 1, announcing their presence, 2, a message. The message is that they do give, there are some cases where kids have been brought on board or talked to the Greys and are taught various lessons. One's in telekinesis. Another felt she was being taught math and various subjects. Some of the kids come away with a very strong interest in physics and quantum physics and this sort of thing. But the Rua Zimbabwe case, which is the ultimate case, a handful of students did receive very clear messages about our environment. And I find this very compelling because what we're looking at now is a worldwide movement among school students, school children, where they walk out of their schools and they protest the lack of political action on climate change. This is a huge thing right now.
No, I get it, but at the same time, because I'm a Trumper and there's such a socialist fucking agenda at colleges now, it pisses me off. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, they are talking about environment, but part of me thinks it's the left just pushing the global warming stuff, which, by the way, Earth is in damn cycles, okay? 20,000 years ago, you think we caused that, ice, the ice age?
Well, here's the thing. Yeah, I totally know what you're saying. And yeah, a single volcano can release more,
pollution
greenhouse gases.
Yeah, it could exactly. It could ruin the atmosphere more than we can.
But what we're looking at is a huge garbage dump in the middle of the ocean. What we're looking at is DDT in all biological matter. What we're looking at is a rapid decline of the bee population. Whether or not this is a cycle, regardless, we're up for some heavy-duty times up ahead.
Well, that's a fact. We all know this. We've seen earthquakes that are fucking bigger than ever, 9.0s. I mean, it's a matter of time before we see something 10.0. I mean, you were here in 94 when the damn 94 quake happened in Northridge. We thought that was big. What the hell's going to happen if we're hit by a 9.8? Remember,
we are seeing global warming. There's no doubt about it.
Yes, ice is absolutely
our
melting.
Oceans will rise.
They are at a small rate now, and they will at a bigger rate. That's a fact. But I think it's more of a cycle at the same time. And I'm sure you know this too, Preston, that they have had to add another extra. Instead of having 5 levels of hurricanes, there's now 6. There's level 6 for things that are hurricanes that are above 180 miles per hour. So this shit's happening to us right now. And I understand that. Are they trying to warn us to maybe start terraforming Mars or have a plan B? Because, again, what I paid attention to, we can only cause, 0.5% of the damage that we've done. But you're right. With the trash, that is true. And Fukushima, that shit's still dumping nuclear waste into the ocean. It's no longer fish in the Pacific that are, going to be damaged or are damaged. It's all over the world at this point. This thing's been running nonstop.
This is a problem, and this is their number one message, and they're very apolitical, by the way, the ETs. They don't...
well, they don't give a shit if it's Republican or Democrat. Obviously not. They just care about the planet and their experiment.
Right, and they're very concerned about our warlike ways. And I think this is a very strong message that we should really start listening to. This is what Quasga told Betty Andreasen flat out, that all our problems could be solved very easily, and that the love is the answer for humankind.
And you know what? Betty Andreasen is an amazing woman. As a matter of fact, people, if you wanted to hear my interview with her, just find it on my YouTube channel. When Raymond Fowler investigated that case, I had them on. When he wrote the new book, unfortunately, I couldn't get Raymond.
But this is the sort of the theme that you hear again and again from ETs. One guy interviewed, he's a Navy medic, asked him flat out, about this kind of stuff, and they're like, we won't discuss politics and we won't discuss religion. We're not going to.
Yeah. Well, that's the common rule. That's definitely the common rule. Okay, now I feel bad because I've sat on this question, but only because it took us away from Schoolyard incidents. But since we are at the end, I have to ask it. This is from Roll Pfeiffer Muller. Here it goes. Is he familiar with the ancient Sapta Kunis foundation from Azivaham, which is called the Anunnakum?
No. I've certainly read about ancient aliens and the Anunnaki and so on, but that's not really my area of expertise, so it's hard for me to speak to that. I do know that there's an enormous amount of evidence of ancient aliens and ETs on Earth, but what I would say is I think what we're going through now in modern times is unprecedented. Certainly for modern humans in terms of 40,000 years ago, there's been nothing like what we're seeing now in terms of huge numbers of people being taken on board. And
clearly they're making their own other species. They're probably maybe even seeing what our future is, which is just devastation. And I mean, it's kind of foolish to think that if there are ETs, that humans don't exist on another Goldilocks planet.
Yeah, I'd be darn shocked if there weren't other human beings out there on other planets.
And dinosaurs. I would think freaking dinosaurs live somewhere too at this point. It's another experiment. Carry it planet to planet.
Well, look at it this way. ET's been collecting genetic material from not only humans, but from all animals.
And for
how long? Probably a very long time.
Well, according to Linda Moulton Howe, at least 250 million years ago is when they started terraforming Earth, let alone, how long they've been present. And if, in fact, the universe is what mainstream science says, 13.5 billion years old, and we're only 4.5 billion, that leaves 9 billion years for other, planetary bodies to develop. And maybe it took them, say, 5-7 8 billion years to get to where they are. Well, at least still is a billion years older than us, right?
All right. Well, if we should destroy this planet, I'm not too worried about the human race going extinct, because certainly the Greys alone have collected enough genetic material from us to restart the human race. I think, extinction is in a way a myth, because really there's an enormous interest in genetics on the part of ETs of all races. And
even ours. We have our new Noah's Ark, which just consists of a bunch of DNA. It's stored somewhere in Norway,
right.
Scandinavia.
Right, numerous places.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't be surprised if you're taken aboard a UFO and shown, the zoo room. I wrote about that in my book, Not From Here, Alien Zoos.
Oh, please touch on that. I know we're past the time, but please tell me that. And
yes.
The audience.
It's the craziest thing, most people are taken on board and physically examined, and that's about it. Maybe they're given a message or two, but there's a smattering of cases where people see very strange things aboard UFOs, and one of them is a zoo. And this happened to a number of people.
Are we talking a zoo of just human animals or other?
Often it's, elk, a group of elk. That's what what was his name? The hunter from Rawlins, Wyoming. I forget his name, who was taken on board. He was hunting elk, and taken on board, and he saw a bunch of elk inside the UFO. And there's cases of alligators being taken on board, elephants, certainly cows, dogs, all kinds of animals, rabbits, you name it. And people have seen these onboard UFOs, human creatures, but not human as well. Betty Andreasen is just one example. She saw all kinds of creatures, some who looked, from the far past, including, Cro-Magnon or Neanderthal-type humanoids. And I know Katerina, she was a contactee. She talked about seeing all kinds of strange primates. And one lady I interviewed from the Midwest, ETs regularly showed her strange animals. That was one of the things they did for her.
Jeez. The agendas that are possible are so many. You mentioned some of our ancestors, and maybe you heard of this recent story that in the Philippines, in a cave, they found a different species of human from 50,000 years ago. That dates to 50,000 years ago. That just changes totally what, we've been taught.
The hobbits, I remember that. It's... Our history is still an unfolding mystery. We really don't know as much as we might think we do. And this is evident by the conflicting reports from, every field of science has a tendency to sort of become solidified and crystallized and closed to outside knowledge. And it's unfortunate because it retards our progress. Because when someone uncovers something that flies in the face of, mainstream, what we believe to be real, it's often covered up or discounted or debunked even. And so new ideas are very slow in coming sometimes. And this was true with the UFO field and UFO crashes, which were circulating for decades, but no UFO researchers would touch them.
Yeah. And yet finally we are touching them. That's the difference.
Yeah. I think we're looking at some definite movement here in a lot of ways. This is a very interesting time to live. We have this information age, this computer age, which has allowed everyone to communicate very quickly. I think our next Phoenix Lights, if that had happened today, would have been a very different story.
Why? Why would you say that, by the way?
Because here we have an incident which was very widely viewed.
I know. I see. Unfortunately, I was there a week before, and I fucking left. I'm so mad at myself, but hindsight is 20/20. If I'd known a freaking UFO a mile wide long was gonna fly right over where I was staying, then of course I would have stayed. But
you and a million other people,
right? Billion, not a million, probably a billion people
but a lot
on
of
this
people
freaking planet wanted to be one of those 10,000. Yeah.
But this was what, 1997, I believe it was.
March 13th, 1997, I believe. Yes.
So not quite the time or the era where everyone had a cell phone, but it's darn close. We just sort of missed it. If that were to happen Now, I think people would be ready.
Oh, people pull their iPhones out with Android, whatever, and start recording it in 4K and FaceTiming with friends to show them on Skype on their. Well, it's
Right.
all that stuff's going to be happening.
We don't have a single incident like that. The closest we have is the Mexico City eclipse sighting, which was filmed from, I think, 20 different locations or something, 30.
And that was, what, 91 or so?
Yeah, that was a while back.
Yeah.
And that thing's persisted. It stayed up there for a good hour or two, which is why. And that's going to happen again. That will happen again. And when this does, it's going to be a different world.
Didn't happen at the last eclipse? I was kind of hoping for that. I never said, obviously, to say that. What you hope for. A lot of times, most of the time, doesn't happen. It's just wishful thinking. But I was like, when the solar eclipse happened not too long ago. It was a year ago or so. You remember this, right? Most of you could see it from up north, Oregon. I was like saying, how cool would it be if a fleet of UFOs just appeared this time, just like Mexico? And of course, it didn't appear. But of course, you can't expect them. You know what I mean? Look, the USS Nimitz incident, that was 2004. So it's not like, every time you look at the window, you're going to see, a disc floating right outside. It doesn't happen that way. I'll be 40 soon, and I've only seen two that are definitely unidentified flying objects. The other I could just say is balloons.
And photographing a UFO is problematic. I know of many cases where there were multiple cameras. There was a Catalina Island case where 12 or 11 people, and 3 of them were photographers, and many of them had cameras, and every single camera failed. It was impossible. So clearly it was being influenced by the UFOs.
Yeah, anyhow, there's a question here for you. And let's see here. Nicholas Cashmore. Preston, what do you predict in the next 0 to 50 years?
A different world for sure. I think we're going to see some really remarkable changes. Not only, what we're looking at is 2 really volatile areas, I think. And one is the disclosure movement. I think that's picking up steam. And I don't see that going the other direction. It might slow down, but 50 years from now, I don't think UFOs are going to be talked about the way they're being talked about now. They're not going to be relegated to the fringe at all. It's going to be the cutting-edge field of science, I would say, but within 50 years. I do think we're going to see open official contact at some point. It's probably going to take 50 years because that's how this disclosure seems to be rolling out. It's very tightly controlled. It's very much drip by drip. But you never know because there's an awful lot of secrets being kept right now and everything's overfilling, kind of. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see some explosive action on the disclosure front and some very large waves of sightings that change public perception of the UFO phenomena to the point where it is taught in schools, it is taken seriously, and the people who get ridiculed are the ones who refuse to believe.
That's very true, unfortunately, and but it's changing. That's a fact. That's absolutely a fact. And so, like you said, we're in for really exciting times. Now, we've absolutely kept you over, and I'm truly sorry. So I'm going to make this really quick. If you have a final message for everybody, what the hell would you say?
I would say, well, in terms of schoolyard encounters, believe your children. At least give them the benefit of the doubt. I think this is a subject that's very important. If you've never seen a UFO and you say, it doesn't affect me, got news for you. It does. There's an unequal distribution of wealth on our planet. The greed that is choking our planet right now, all of this is connected to the UFO phenomena. We have the technology to solve the environmental crisis, the economic crisis, the energy crisis, all of which are largely manufactured. Let's face it. So we could live in a brand new age where we aren't working all the time for slave wages, trying to survive and spending all our money on homes and healthcare and food.
And insurance and all this other bullshit, yeah.
It's ridiculous. These banking industry, this oil industry, the pharmaceutical industry, these guys are in for a rude wake-up call. I don't know exactly who's controlling our
But
planet, but I think we're looking at a real shift here. And that would be my message is let's get together. Let's erase our boundaries. We're all actually human beings together on this planet. There's no reason we can't get along in love, in harmony. There's enough for everybody. Let's do it.
hey, that's better said than what Reagan said in the 80s. So well said, Preston. Everybody, please check out Preston's books. Thank you all for the support. And you see the social media page if you've seen this already. So I will catch you Thursday, probably an hour earlier than tonight. Bye.